It's the County Conversation, episode 10. We're into double digits. And this week, to discuss the return of the Vitality Blast, international dreaming, 2 days of fielding, and the meaning of life, we have the cricketers Nick Friend and slow left arm extraordinaire, Durham's Callum Parkinson. I'm your host, Karen Ponsonby, and we're going to start on the low today and gradually get happier throughout. And so, Callum, firstly, welcome. Secondly, and I'm sorry for starting on this, I want to take us back 2 months to April the 10th, and your teammate Alex Leaves gives an interview to the Daily Mail where he backs Durham to challenge for the title in your first year back in Division 1, the club's first year back in Division 1. Then on April the 11th, you win the toss, you elect to bowl, and Warwickshire walk off 490 for one. They finish 698 for three. At what point are we allowed to admit that this is quite funny? At what point in the dressing room are you able to look around and go, this it's not going brilliantly, guys? Take us through that because it's something that doesn't exist in the club game, kind of 2 days in the dirt. Welcome, by the way.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, guys. It's a hell of a first question. To answer, really, I think it's probably about tea time. I think, obviously, being a new signing, we kind of went in and it was with all this talked up seam attack. There's obviously been a lot in the press about, how good of a bowling unit we had. And it's just like a bad dream, really. The first two sessions just kind of got away from us. And then, obviously, it was a small boundary, good pitch. But I kind of sat and had a beer after the day one and just thought, oh, that could have gone a bit better, and ended up doing a lot of the bowling actually on day two. And somehow managed to break Durham's all-time runs conceded in my first ever bowl. So as a couple of days went, it was a tough start, and yeah, the lads, you had to chuckle about it in the end because if you didn't, you'd have probably cried.
Does that on a serious note? Do you head home after that match as a new signing and go, whoa, like this is actually quite tough here. Like I'm trying to impress in a new environment, and that's been a poor, like quite dramatic start. Or does it get to such an extreme level where you go, this is just part of it? Like we'll get to one that isn't the flattest thing in the world without a 40-yard boundary, and we'll be okay.
It was a weird one. I actually spoke to George DeBell at the end of day two, and obviously I went for 206 myself, and I did get two of the three wickets, so that was a positive. But I actually thought I'd bowled all right, so I kind of left the game thinking, I've kind of shown my new teammates that I'm prepared to do the donkey work, and I'll put my chest out when things are going poorly. But it was just one of them. We just didn't bowl well enough, and we're probably a little bit undercooked. The northeast weather. I mean, it's raining again today, but hadn't been kind to us in the lead up to the game, and obviously Scott Boland went down injured, and Potsy and Carsey probably weren't quite at the best. So there's like numerous factors. But in terms of like a debut, I just kind of thought it can't get any worse. And then hopefully things will get better.
And things have got a lot better. There was something I know you've spoken to Nick previously. You're a big Bolton fan. Me and Nick are both QPR fans. And just to kind of continue on the theme quickly, before we talk about serious stuff, I always think as clubbies, we always think about the highs of like being a professional cricketer, what we're missing out on the good stuff. In terms of the bad stuff, like yeah, the worst we can do is field for 50 overs and someone gets like I don't know 350, 400. But we also kind of miss stuff because it's your job to play cricket. You're a big Bolton fan. You were playing whilst Bolton were losing the playoff final, unfortunately. Like, what is that like? How do you keep up to date with the score? What's happening?
It was a truly shocking couple of hours. We were going really swimmingly at Blackpool. We were like three down. I'm batting 11, and I'm thinking the lads have got this under control. I'm gonna, prop my phone up, just getting ready, getting a bit nervous, starting to annoy a few people. Kickoffs approaching. See Supri and Everett walk out in his suit, leading the boys out. I'm getting emotional, and I'm thinking, this is it. Pretty much Lanks took four wickets in 2 overs, and I'm like panic station pads on. Then proceeded to get a duck. Came in, we were 2-0 down after 20 minutes. And then I went out to field and basically asking spectators, because I feel fine leg to fine leg because I hate standing in the ring. I'm a bit scared of the ball when I'm at like point and square leg. So basically running up and down Blackpool, and like these blokes in like tangerine kits just shouting 3-0, 4-0, just lying to me, just like belittling me. Yeah, it was a tough. And then eventually some bloke came to me and was like, "You've lost. We'll see you next year at Bloomfield Road." So that was it was a tough afternoon. But
We do have.
because you are a proper Bolton fan. Like, this isn't just you being like, "Oh, my team's the final." This is like, you are. If you weren't at Blackpool, you would have been at Wembley, right?
I would have gone. I'd have gone with my dad. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of them. Like, the day just went by so fast. I kind of, in my head, I'm like, I'm going to watch at least 80 minutes because we're 2-3 down. Robbo and Dave Benningham are in. I'm like, these two are absolute goal batters. They know I want to watch the match at 4. Like, and then, yeah, a couple of soft ones and then a couple of good balls and I'm in. My pad got blown off but Josh Murphy had scored a brace. It's like, oh. But yeah, tough afternoon.
I feel like that's the one. That's like the one. It's like the 2 hours a season where those two haven't just batted.
Yeah, it was probably one of our only collapses in the past couple of weeks. We've batted pretty well in the red ball. They just timed it for the Sky Bet League One playoff final. But yeah, one of them things. And yeah, it was a rough week at Blackpool on the whole, really.
How is, to move on to more, like a more overall Durham perspective? The season's actually, I know you've had a tough start in the Blast, you've kind of lost your first 2 matches, but the county championship has ended up on a bit of a positive. You've got 2 wins under your belt. I know you guys didn't get over the line in Blackpool against Lancashire, but it was like a hell of a cricket match. How's it been? How's it been being at a new club, kind of bigger expectations potentially? I don't know if that's unfair to say on perhaps Leicestershire or Derbyshire, but as an entity, how's your first 2 months been?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think the change of scenery came at a nice time in my career. I'm 27 now. I'd obviously been at Leicester for 7-8 years and absolutely loved my time there and given everything in a Leicester shirt that I possibly could. And in terms of the first couple of months at Durham, I've really enjoyed the environment. Everything you hear about Ryan Campbell is true. He's such a positive guy. Wants you to play on the front foot and really wants you to go out and express yourself. I've loved working with Graham Onions as a bowling coach. He's been fantastic, and I think the biggest thing is the calibre of player in the dressing room to obviously be lining up with Ben Stokes. The other internationals in there: Potts, Cars, Borthwick, Lees. I guess for me the biggest challenge is believing that you belong in that environment. And like you said, we've obviously had an interesting start. We don't feel like we've played our best cricket, but to be sitting 5th in the championship with 2 wins is a decent enough start. But as Cambo and I think quite a few lads came out in the press, we're quite an ambitious group and we want to be challenging near the top. So hopefully the best is yet to come for us.
When we've spoken before, I guess it's obviously been quite self-deprecating about, I don't know, like your own game, your own career. I guess like how you've got to where you are, what you were a senior a decade ago. Like, what is it like having someone like Ben Stokes walk in? Do you find that? Do you still find? Is it? I don't know. Like, was it odd at first? Do you still find it surreal? Like, what's? I don't know. Like, what's he in particular been like in your own mind?
I think the biggest compliment I can give Ben Stokes is that there's none of that really. Like everyone, I think he encourages, and the way he is himself, he puts you at ease, and you can definitely be yourself while pinching yourself that you're obviously sharing a dressing room with him. And some of the things he's achieved in his career are just unbelievable. And but in terms of kind of how he is as a person and the effect he had on the dressing room, it was just, as you can expect, massively positive. Wanted to play on the front foot. Just a really positive, supportive teammate was obviously the experience I've had so far, and that's obviously not going into, obviously didn't quite get the runs that he wanted, but 2 colossal spells at Blackpool, and he was basically the difference between the sides at the Riverside against Somerset. So I can only speak really highly, and I think that was obviously part of the move to play with people of his calibre.
Had you come across him? Sorry, much in your. I'm trying to remember if you were at Northern Supercharged at the same time. But, I don't know. But would you have played against each other, spent much time in each other's company until now?
Not really. I was in the Superchargers. Was it the first year of the 100? I struggled with my years. Was it 2021? The first year he played a few games. Right. Played a few games there. I spent a little bit of time socially with him, but I was probably a bit younger and didn't quite, sit in the same probably social groups in them. And it was such a short window, the 100. I think I've only played one T20 against him. But no, it's the first time that he's been around, I think, for a sustained period. He's in day-to-day training. He's, in the nets all the time. So, and to watch him up close, his work ethic, you can see the player he is. You can see why, the amount of balls he hits and the dedication he has to his craft.
It's no disrespect at all intended to the great Scott Borthwick as the captain of the club, but with this, there's so much, what's the word, kind of hype around Stokes' leadership and how it's this kind of, all these England players are saying how revolutionary and how amazing experience it was. Is there any part of you which goes Scott, do you mind sitting aside just for one game? I want to see what this is like. How does that work if you've got someone who's considered to be kind of this revolutionary leader sat in the corner? And then I know Scott and Ben are quite close, I believe, but that's got to be a difficult dynamic to kind of balance.
Yeah, definitely. I think you just alluded to it. I think they're quite close mates, which I think helps. I think you definitely saw at Blackpool when the game was either going away from us or it was on a bit of a knife edge that Scott would lean on Ben, as anyone in the right mind would. It's interesting because I like to think of myself, I'm quite a conservative cricketer. I obviously spoke with Nick quite a bit, and I'm a bit old school. And the captain, I think, county championship cricket is a lot different to captain in England. You lose a test match, there's 4 in a series. The series probably gets forgotten about in a couple of months, if you know what I mean. The implications of losing a championship game can, there's relegation, there's a financial aspect, and there's just different little subtleties to. For example, we might have had 8 men on the edge against Lancashire at the end, which would probably not be what Stokesy wants us to have, but it's just the way that county cricket goes in terms of you want to delay the declaration so you're not batting as long. Just little sort of things like that. But, Scott and Ben being close, they work really well. I just think Badger struggled to take the ball out of Stokes' hand. I think he was getting worried that the ECB might ring him when he was in his 11th over. But yeah, both two great guys who work really well together, and I think the lads at Durham are just delighted to have Stokesy playing, and I know Scott is as well.
Right, the Vitality Blast has started. Durham, as alluded to earlier, difficult start, 0 from 2 to begin with. Something I'm kind of interested in, you mentioned just before about how ambitious a club Durham is. How does it sit in terms of expectations within a club? So, for instance, Durham first year back in Division 1, you're challenging at the top half of the table. But over the last, I think it's 2018 was the last time the club made it to the quarterfinals of the Blast. How does that blend in? When you're in a changing room, will it be right, lads, county championship, we're really hot on that this year, and our expectations for the Blast might be a bit lower? Or is it a case of those expectations are maintained across the board?
I think maintained across the board. The saying Cambo uses a lot is he wants us to be the best club in England, and to be the best club in England, you've got to compete on all 3 fronts, and you've got to provide players for England, and you've got to provide players for the 100, I guess. Like you said, in my time at Leicester, I've always thought Durham underachieved in the Blast playing against them. I think, like you said, 2018 was the last time they made finals day, so it's definitely an area. I look at our team on paper, we've got a strong side. I think we've got a very strong bowling attack, and there's no reason this competition, like everyone says, it's about momentum. And if we can catch fire at the right time, hopefully we're still hopeful that we can make a push for the quarterfinals.
Do you feel at all as a spinner, as a finger spinner in T20, obviously with the IPL where things just took off, we had 240, 260, 270. Have you felt a change in the game? Have you felt a day that you've had to bowl differently from in 2024 versus 2017 or whenever you started kind of playing in the format?
It's a tough question. I think when you first start, you're not really aware of what's going on. It's like self-preservation. You're just trying to get through game to game. I think the game's obviously changing. I think batters are getting better. There's more shot options. You can't tie down batters as easily. And I feel like the 5-6 years ago, there was a knocking around period. I know they talk about it in 50 overs, in the middle overs. I felt when I first started, kind of overs 7 to 12 were not milking overs, but you definitely were looking to keep wickets in the tent for the back end, where teams just keep coming now. They're always left hand, right hand. There's always, a small boundary they can target. And I definitely feel like, you're definitely the prey rather than the predator as a left arm spinner at the minute.
And do you have any correlation? Because something I'm interested in, I remember talking to, I think it was David Payne. I don't know why, but I think he was talked about, he defined his season. I might be making this up here, but he said it was about how many times he went for above or below 32, kind of 8 and over was his kind of number in his mind. And I remember speaking to a spinner and he was like, I want to be positive. I want to have gone below the run rate of the match more than 50% of my games. That's how I define success, kind of thing. Do you have something like that in terms of how you define it? And more to the point, how often do you walk off from a 2020 game and feel your figures reflect how well you bowled, or is it just a lottery?
I don't think it's a lottery. I think most of the time a couple of times a season you might be like, oh, that's a bit, I bowl better than that, or I've got away with a few there. I think the marker I use, I want to go for under 30.
Okay.
And I want to go for under 15 in the power play because I know I'll probably bowl 2 overs. So that's how I kind of split it down. I'm not too fussed about wickets because I think they just come by doing the right things. But yeah, I think it's tough because it's hard to define figures, I think, in T20 now with the way the game's going, and someone can bowl 4 overs for 40 and have done a really good job. They might have bowled 2 overs in the power play, 2 overs at the death, to a small boundary, to 2 lads that are set. It's so hard quantifying what is a good spell. I think that's the way the game's going. It used to be if you went for over 7 and over 8 and over, you'd bowl poorly. Whereas now, I look at we go to Grace Road on Friday night, which I know as well as anyone, it can be a bit of an ice rink. It's a good pitch, fairly small straight. I know that one of our seamers might go for 40, but he might have done a bloody good job. So I just think, the game's mad, and I even looking at it and I think, especially 50 over cricket is becoming too batsman friendly, and I hope T20 doesn't become that as well.
One thing you did do recently is, for those who don't know, Callum was part of this great Lancashire age group, which I remember me and him spoke about a few years ago. Is had both Parkinsons, Josh Bohannon, Saqib Mahmood, Haseeb Hamid,
Blackpool's Mark
Harry
Waddington.
Dearden, Blackpool's Mark Waddington. It was a remarkable age group, which kind of has lays claim to being one of the best ever. Callum is going to be the best man at Josh Bohannon's wedding next year, and you've got him out for the first time in professional cricket. That must have been mate, it must have been fun. It must, above all else, because you get one over on your mate.
I think it's definitely made the best man speech a bit easier.
Perfect.
But it's such a mixed feeling. Obviously I've known Josh since I was 9. Obviously been friends best part of 18, 19 years, and he's probably one of the first that you look out for, as well as my brother, of how they've gone. So you get him out, and then at the same time you're delighted because you've got a wicket, and then you kind of sink in and you go, oh, it is a weird one. It's like getting family out, it feels like, but I'll probably add some mayonnaise onto it at the wedding and make a good story out of it. You
and Matt got each other out, didn't you, in 2019? I want to say
2019 championship game. Yeah, great.
Probably got the date, haven't you?
Him getting me out was more of an achievement because back then he genuinely might as well just batted with his front pad. He could not hold a bat.
He's in the runs this year, though, isn't he?
Yeah, he's the Parkinson who can hold a bat at the minute. He's absolutely flying. I don't know what they've put in the water down there in Canterbury, but I mean he'll revert back to average soon. I'm sure of it.
Callum, you went away for the England Lions basically over the winter. First of all, how was that? But the thing I'm really interested in is an article came out in The Guardian that linked you with the Test tour of India. What on earth is that like? Do you know where that comes from? How do you react to it? Are you spending a day thinking you're in the team? Like, what's that from the outside? That's an incredibly peculiar experience.
Do you go chasing info, or?
I think I might have messaged my agent and been kind of like, is this legit? Like, and kind of the feedback I got was like, you're obviously in the mix. But then I think, as I said to you, Nick, like, there's probably 3 or 4 in the mix off the back of the Abu Dhabi trip. Shoaib and Tommy and myself and young Jack Carson at Sussex were probably the 4 spinners. Well, there's 4 frontline spinners away at the Lions pre-Christmas, which pre-Christmas was really, really fun couple of weeks in Abu Dhabi. It was kind of a real cohesion of young spinners really trying to help each other. Obviously with Swanee in charge, and Neil Kalim was there, and Richard Dawson for a period. So that was a really good kind of experience. And then I think that article came out, was it just before Christmas or at the end of that trip? And in fairness, like I thought I was close. I'd bowled pretty well in Abu Dhabi, and then Shoaib just nipped in at the last. He's a special bowler, and he bowled really well in the tour match at the end of that Abu Dhabi trip. He outbowled me and Jack really. And, they made the right decision. I watched Shoaib bowl, and he was born to bowl off spin. And then obviously we went to India in January, which probably the toughest 4 weeks I think I've had. Obviously we're based in Ahmedabad for the full time. Just a tough trip against probably a little bit out my depth, I think, at the time. I'd love to get another opportunity to right my wrongs, I guess, and hopefully be in a better position. It was definitely a learning winter, I think.
What made the 4 weeks? Here you go, Nick.
I was just going to ask on the initial selection bit. Like, is that, you say Master Agent, but like presumably you can't help but, I don't know, like just have that excitement in the back of your mind. Like, did that take some? I don't know. Did that take a bit of getting over? Because presumably you do start building it up in your mind as to what it might be like when you're leaving, what the opportunities are. All everything that comes with that 5-test series. Like, I don't know. Did that take a bit of getting over, or was being on that Lions trip a pretty big sort of fillip anyway when it came to selection on that?
Yeah, I think I've never really been one that's thought I was anywhere close, if you know what I mean. Like the Lions.
That's what I mean. It's like having suddenly being told that you are. Like, is it quite a? I don't know. Like, is that the challenging bit? Like, because I guess it's thrust upon you a bit from, as you say, having quite sort of like low self expectations to suddenly being told that, oh, this might be happening.
Yeah, I never really kind of probably got too far ahead. Like, obviously,
Sure.
One article, I didn't really see that as gospel, if you know what I mean. And I kind of knew, well, and putting 2 and 2, I thought Tom Hartley would go as he did. He did really well. And I never, probably for 1 minute, thought they'd take 3 left-arm spinners. I know that's what the initial article was. That's a bit of a weird question to answer, because obviously you get a little bit excited when you see the piece in The Guardian, but at the same time, like, kind of grounded up to know that I didn't feel like I was kind of that close to warrant getting excited, if you know what I mean. I was just obviously hopeful that I'd done enough to go away to India with the Lions, which I know I was lucky enough to do. I think my big frustration with the winter was probably not believing in myself enough in India, and probably putting a bit too much pressure, especially when Leachy went down injured. Probably put a bit too much pressure on myself in the 2 games that we played. Probably feel like I missed a bit of an opportunity there, but I can sleep at night because I tried my best, and it wasn't quite good enough for them 4 weeks in India, but that's fine. Like, keep working and move forward.
When we spoke on the back of that trip, you talked about the difference between sort of English left arm spin and Indian left arm spin. Like, did you feel? I don't know. Looking back on that now, do you feel like you could ever have known any different, if you know what I mean? Or I guess all of your cricket, all your development, late development, has come to be the bowler you are in county cricket over the last however many years for Derby, Leicester, Durham. Like, I think what you were talking about there was, what you talked about with the difference was basically line, wasn't it? And I can't remember how you said, but looking to bowl slightly straighter. I can't. So you'll be better.
Yeah, no, it was the big thing I took away, and I know obviously me and Jack Carson get on really well, and we spoke quite a bit, is the shape on the ball that the Indian spinners get was probably not quite as good as us. They probably didn't put as much on it. They just didn't miss. So, like, they're just consistent. And like the English way, I think, with batting now is, I see it all the time when we play against like a young English batter or young England under 19. They've got all the tricks. They got, they want to reverse sweep, they want to sweep, they want to paddle you. Like, Indian batters, they just didn't do that to us. They just sat and waited and just grinded us down. They'd only sweep when they're on like 100, like 120, and then it's like, well, he's batting in his dressing gown and slippers, like. But our lads, and again, this is not me for 1 minute slighting, the lads that are on the trip, because there's some, hell of a great group of batting lads. But if we got in any pressure, we'd sweep or reverse sweep, and that'd just bring in LB, bowled. Like, didn't even really need to spin it. It just, pressure would build, and then you've seen it, haven't you, in cricket over here? Big sweep hits the pad, huge appeal.
Yeah.
So that was one thing, and I actually struggled for the 4 weeks with probably field settings. Was one thing I struggled with. I think we're obviously trying to play this positive attacking brand, to kind of mirror what I don't want to call it baseball, but to mirror what England are doing, and not really to have sweepers. And I really struggle with that. I like having quite an English thing. I like having a deep cover because that's my bad ball. I bowl a cut ball, and when that goes for 4, you bowl a certain way, and so I struggled a little bit with that side of it as well. But I put it down to it was all really good experience, and I hope in the long run, it makes me a better bowler and hopefully a better person as well.
The stuff you take back from those takeaways, like I guess the weird thing about, I don't know, like the seasons and the way this all works, is that presumably you take you sort of bank those takeaways, but then get back here and get back into what you do here. So I guess what you do here is what works here, and do you know what I mean? Like all that stuff is really valuable, but how long before you use it again?
Oh, will I ever use it again? Yes, that's the big question. I think it's just I saw it as like trying to add layers to my game. So like,
so how transferable is the stuff you took away from that? Like, is it stuff?
I think the stuff that they wanted me to do, I could have done now, like where I'm at technically wise, and I probably went there a bit undercooked, a bit undercoached, if anything. Having not really played much red ball cricket at Leicester, especially towards the end of the year, and obviously done quite a lot of work with Graham Onions now, feeling in a pretty good place. Obviously bowled quite a lot of overs in the Championship that I probably wasn't expecting to this point. So would I feel a bit more confident going now? I think, yeah, definitely. But, hindsight is, it's a wonderful thing. And if I do get another opportunity at some point in my career to represent the Lions, then, I'll give it my best shot again.
Can I ask a question I think Cam might be preparing to ask now? So,
Go for it.
Well, it's one that Cam and I discussed earlier, and I know it's one that me and you kind of touched on before. Like, this winter was really weird for you in a way, because reading back an interview that we did when you were first picked by for that Lions squad, you always considered Matt the spinner in the family, and you in that interview described yourself as like the bits and pieces guy who's always been able to bat. Like, obviously much more than that, but I don't know, how weird has this last 8 or so months been for you in that, like, have you got your head around it? Because I guess, as you say, like Matt was the leggy forever, wasn't he? And you were the opening bowler at Bunbury, and like you're the one who's changed in a way rather than him. Like, how, I don't know, like, have you been able to fully square like what you are now, if that makes sense? Like, so because even a couple of years ago, Matt was on England tours. Matt was on making his Test debut. Obviously, this winter, Matt was moving to Kent, and you were in India with the Lions. Like, I don't know. Like, when we spoke, you were sort of getting your head around it. But have you made sense of it more?
Not really. No. Like, it's still something I probably process occasionally. I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to take belief from is that you might not believe it yourself, but other people do. So, like, I'm not been picked for. I was obviously picked for the Lions because I think I can do a good job. And Durham, I don't know if I said this in a past interview, but one of the biggest compliments I took from Durham and from Northey and Cambo is there was quite a few spinners out of contract looking to move. They could have gone for Matt. I know Daniel Moriarty was out of contract, but they made it pretty clear that they wanted me, and that was obviously a feather in my cap and something I take great belief and confidence from. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not overnight all of a sudden going to change kind of my view. Like, I'm obviously like to think I'm quite humble and probably a little bit too depreciative at times. And I still see myself as probably bits and pieces, even though I've not scored a run yet this season. So maybe I'm going to have to start calling Matt the bits and pieces player.
I think something you said there, which I hadn't really considered before, was the kind of nerves that go into an England Lions tour. I think I'd always wrongly kind of thought of it as like not glorified friendlies, but like being in the county championship, you'd have that kind of tension of playing like league competitive cricket, and that wouldn't necessarily exist on Lions tour. And that sounds like that's wrong in effect. And then that kind of the question I wanted to ask that, and Nick's an expert on this now, the iHawk technology. But when the with England going towards like attributes rather than numbers, as it were, and I think it got overplayed a little bit, but the kind of high release point, and we want someone who drives the ball into the wicket from 6 foot a million, blah blah blah. How do you get your head around that as a player? Because you're like, well, I'm not those things. So can I ever? How can I impress you if I'm not without having a 6 inch growth spurt, basically?
It's a good question. I think you've got your lot, haven't you? Like you said, like I'm not all of a sudden going to have a thick head of hair and be 6'4". If I was
One day, mate, I believe in you.
One day, yeah. But like you are what you are, aren't you? And I can't all of a sudden bowl from a high release point like Bashir, or I can't, probably like and Tommy. Tommy's 6'2", 6'3". I can't get as tight to the stumps as Leachy because at the minute that's not where I'm at. So I think if you're chasing them things, you probably lose sense of kind of who you are, and like you've ultimately got to a point where you've got to the place where you are by doing what you do and the attributes that you have, and I think you've just got to try and make them attributes as good as you can.
What do you mean there about getting tight to the stumps? Because I was with you with the Sherb and the Tom Hartley thing, but like, why?
No, just a technical cue. So like,
yeah.
I think one thing I like about Leachy is he doesn't really miss the stumps. So you talk about Indian spinners, how they don't make his release point is pretty mid crease. Quite a lot of young spinners are quite wide on the crease. I think what kind of separates Leachy at the minute is he's got an amazing use of the crease. He can get tight to the stumps, he can go wide. So yeah, that was just a case in point of like I at the minute can't do that, and me chasing to do that might affect what I do well.
But what, like, in terms of from a technical perspective, do you just mean like you'd miss effectively? You want a more consistent release point wherever you're on the crease, so you know what you're doing.
It's just having probably going to your point on the attributes in terms of I can't chase what others do, if you know what I mean. I've got what I've got. I'm trying to make what I do as skillful as I can, I guess. And in terms of players, kind of them after attributes, that's fine. But again, they're probably narrowing their search pool down, if you know what I mean. If they're constantly looking for blokes that another big talk at the minute is ball speed amongst the seamers, and I know Potsy's been kind of quite wary of his speeds and kind of where he's at in certain spells and stuff, which I think is good to a degree, but it hopefully doesn't detract from Potsy just doing a sterling job as he always does for Durham.
Do you want to go? Something me and Nick were wondering about was kind of what is the thing in the game, because we always talk about like the schedule, and like Nick's done loads of work on it where he's like, where people are getting injured, people are gonna having to drive home at 2 a.m. It's people are getting injured because of it. Do you guys sit around in the dressing room and kind of chat about something and a surprise that it's not part of the wider conversation within cricket?
The schedule's a big one for me. I've always had one thing that I'd change in the schedule, but I think it's so
I'm so excited.
It's a bit left field, and I think only 30 cricketers will be excited by it, and you're going to know what type of cricketer they are. My biggest thing that I'd do in the county game is I'd have 2 rounds a season where you can do whatever you want to the pitch to make it spin. You can rake it, like play on a hybrid pitch, play on something that you've trained on for 3 weeks, right? And because every time, like my biggest gripe is game finishes in 2 days, or there's 16 wickets on the first day to seam, and no one says anything because, or they'll go, it's just not great batting. The ball spins from day one in the championship. You're at risk of getting dot points, which I get is in the rules. But then we go to India and it rags. And granted, this current England team, they've made strides in India massively. They won in Pakistan. But the county player, the main problem area is spin. Young players, what's the area that they struggle with most? It's probably good, high quality spin. And that's probably less and less in England because of the pitches. So for 2 rounds a season or whatever, throw sand on, throw rake it, get the groundsman, make Somerset go to every pitch and do what they used to do. And at least then you're going to get each team will play 2 spinners. And then we're producing spinners. We're getting people used to the ball spinning and playing it. And obviously I'd be happier because you get 2 rounds where it's in.
How extreme is it in India? Because I in Abu Dhabi before the test trip, the England guys were lobbing sand on the pitches. Like, can we, as people who've played cricket in one country, like wrap our heads around how different is it? Is it a completely alien sport?
It is. It's definitely huge difference to here. Like obviously the test pitches in the Indian series were spun quite aggressively, didn't they? And I think that was the one thing. We went away to Abu Dhabi as a Lions group and basically trained on the same pitch for 3 weeks, and it was ragging by the end. And it was great practice. Like, you know, Swanee was bowling. He was the best spinner on the trip. Didn't miss. But we then actually the Lions series in Ahmedabad didn't spin off straight really. So that was kind of like we obviously built up to be like, got to have these options against a turning ball. It didn't spin, but yeah, I think it's definitely different. Like as we saw in the Test series, England India, that first pitch especially was a ragger, wasn't it?
How do you find that challenge of you mentioned putting too much pressure on yourself in India, but I guess it probably happens once or twice a year here as well, where it does suddenly rag. I don't know, like, is there, like, as much as we talked earlier about the Warwickshire game at the start of the season, is it almost harder when, as you say, it doesn't often happen here, but when the spinner is the key and they throw you the ball, like, go on, bowl them out twice. Like, win the match? You've got 3 spinners of varying quality on it. I feel like you're the only one who can talk to this.
I don't know about that. I've seen your left arm leggies.
Unbelievable.
36 miles an hour, eh?
The weirdest bit is like you'll go to a venue and it might be like, and I'm experiencing it at the minute a little bit at Durham because we've obviously got this talked up seam attack, rightly so. You know, we've got some great seamers. So understandably, teams are probably wanting to play Durham on things that aren't going to nip around, and they want to probably leaning more to taking me on as probably the highlighted weak part of the attack, which I'm quite happy with because I'd rather play on that than a nipper. But it's interesting, like the dialogue, what happens when we turned up to the Aegeus Bowl and it was visibly quite dry, and like everyone in the day before was like, "Ooh, might spin this," you know, and then a coach will go, "I think it'll take some spin," and then like you're sat there as the only spinner in the squad going, like, "Oh god." So it does take some getting used to. I think now I've played for like a few years. I think it affected me more when I was younger. Like if I started seeing it spinning from the other spinner, I'd be like, "Oh my god!" Like I'm not going to spin a ball. Like everyone's going to look at me and think I'm rubbish. Whereas now I'm kind of like I'm a bit older. Just do your thing and hope for the best, basically, and just try and bowl your best ball as long as you can. But I'm all for it. Like I've loved a couple of the pitches we've played on so far. I've spun like with. I've also the biggest thing that I've enjoyed this year is, and I'll mention it on here. We've obviously played against some high quality spinners, and like they've been so generous with the time. So like me being a Badger, like we played Essex, 3rd game of the season, and I didn't manage to catch Harmer after the game, but he gave me his number and like we text a little bit, and he sent me, like, he'd been so generous with his time and sent me like quite a few long texts about technical stuff, his thoughts, like pre-game stuff. And obviously at Blackpool managed to get 10 minutes with Gary the Goat at the end, and he was so chatty during the game, managed to bowl at him in the game, bowled a couple of good balls at him actually, and he was quite funny because I said to him, I asked him while I was out there when he was at the non-strikes end, I said, "Am I all right picking your brains at some point?" And he said, "Yeah." And then I bowled a couple that spun past, I think it was Sakib's bat, and he went, "Can I pick your brains at the end?"
Oh, there we go. Easy.
So I had 10 minutes with him, which was, gold dust. And we also had the other Durham spinner, George Drizzle, was there. And again, he was really generous with George. And then I actually had a good chat with Liam Dawson as well, who felt I could probably relate to a bit more. Obviously, very successful in what he does, like unbelievable cricketer, but, bowls left down spin, very successful in white ball. And again, I had 10 minutes with him at the Aegeus Bowl, and quite a nice little community. And I never really met any of them three, but so generous with the time. And
can I ask? I've always been fascinated by it because everyone says this. Particularly, I think you mainly read it with people talking about Harmer because he's been the dominant spinner on the circuit for since 2017, really, isn't it? Like, everyone talks about these conversations. What gets said? Because you can all bowl. You've probably had a lot of the same coaches, certainly the same methods, play at bowl at the same places, and finger spin is, it's a nuanced art, isn't it? It's an art, but there's not an enormous amount that you can do different, is there? Like, it's, do you know what I mean? It's subtlety rather than, it's not going up to Shane Warne and saying, teach me a flipper. Like,
I get what you mean.
What are the conversations? Like, I've always heard this, and I've always been interested by
it. I think a lot of it's kind of technical stuff for me. So, like, kind of run up speeds and kind of positions on the crease, and Lyon spoke about kind of arm speed, and to be fair, Dorse was really good. Again, Dorse spoke quite a bit about lines and fields. I think that's been a big one, is fields. Picking the brains of these guys, why they have certain fields, why they have why Lyon has 3 men out for the first.
Give us an example. I love this stuff.
Yeah, so Lyon, for example, I sat there and watched Lyon bowl on day, I don't know what day they Bolton get beat, day 2. Watching him bowl, and he's got 3 men on the edge, 4 men on the edge. He's got a deep point, long on, deep mid wicket, and deep square. And I'm thinking, if I had them, Badger would come up to me and be like, "Why have we got 4 men out?" Like, but because of how good he is and how well he holds length and the shape he has and the energy he has on the ball, you can't hit him to long on, because you'll hit it to short mid wicket trying to hit it to long on. And I'm just picking his brains about how he's a bit more old school and doesn't want to go for runs and doesn't want to kind of get taken off. And to hear him saying them words, like, especially as a young English spinner who's, you don't want to bowl 4 overs for 20, you're off, aren't you?
Do you drag Scott into the conversation?
Scott sat in. Scott sits in on them all. Obviously, still bowls his outrageously good leg spin, Badger. 4 Test wickets, of course. But he's good. I enjoy playing under Badger. He's very receptive to what you want and open to listen. But yeah, no, they've been highlights of this season so far, especially speaking to Lyon and Harmer and Dorse.
I always find it one of the cricket sayings which blows my mind or annoys me the most when they say, "Oh, you don't want to set a field for a bad ball." But I was like, but I will bowl one. I bowl one every over, and I have done for 20 years. So I reckon let's just have someone out on the boundary and go for 1 rather than 4. I know I'm not the person who's meant to answer the question about conversation, but I interviewed.
You're echoing what I've said.
Oh mate, genuinely, it's wonderful. I had like 10 minutes interviewing Simon Harmer, and he for everyone listening to this, you obviously won't know, but I also try and bowl off spin. And he started talking. I was like, this is a different world. I was like, I can't quite get my head around how he's talking about the technical things of what he's doing. And he was talking about how he bowls his arm ball. And he was like, if you've got a messier seam, you can kind of go cross seam or whatever, and like people won't be able to tell the difference. He's like, the problem with me is my seam's too perfect. And I was like, that's a great problem to have. Well done, Simon. He's like, me and Nathan Lyon, our seam is so good, so we can't run our finger down the back of the ball, or we can't go cross seam or whatever, because people will be able to see the change. So I don't know if I'll be able to describe this properly, but he basically says like he pushes the ball out with his thumb. So rather than the seam going from like 1 to 5 o'clock or 1 to 7 o'clock rotation, it rotates from like 2 to 8. And so the seam looks almost identical to the batter, but it's more likely to kiss the leather and like skip on. And I was like, I can't do that. And it was just kind of it was a nice moment. I enjoy moments which reinforces how much better like professionals and like elite professionals are than the rest of us. But and obviously I'm going to have the final word on spin bowling in this conversation.
Can I ask one more question about the conversations?
Yeah,
this isn't a deliberate like Ollie Robinson segue, but I remember speaking to Adam Wheater about keeping to Harmer, and he was fascinating. And the best thing he said is that the toughest thing about keeping to Harmer, because I just said, I've got a wrist spin. I just went, he bowls off spin. Like, tell me that hard.
off
Like, why does everyone miss it? And he just said what Harmer does that you'd never seen before is that he makes batters miss balls that as they come out of the hand don't look like they should be missed. And I was just wondering, how much do you speak to keepers about what you're doing? Because I guess they've got the best view on everything you're doing.
Yeah, I probably speak with Robbo and Ackers. So Colin Ackerman stood at first slip for me for probably every game I've played in my career, pretty much.
Yeah.
And probably speak to them every couple of overs, or as I'm running through, they'll pat me on the bum, or Robbo will speak to me about paces, or could we move a fielder and stuff. Like he's obviously not to champion him because he's certainly where my feelings are on if we were to ask that question. But Robbo's awesome in terms of with the gloves, and obviously he's very good in terms of his angles and his knowledge of spin. For me, I've been lucky that I've obviously played with him all winter as well, which was a bonus.
Because obviously from what you said about Graham Onions, it sounds like he gets it. But I guess like most counties don't have it, and we touched this with Mason Crane a few weeks ago on this pod. Most counties don't have a spin coach. Keepers don't, I guess not every keeper is going to be a spin bowling expert or have the eye for that. Like, don't know, you count yourself quite lucky to be in that, to have Onions and Robinson thing. So I guess you can find yourself on your own as a spinner. Like if you don't have guys who know what they're talking about out there with you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Bunny's brilliant because Bunny's worked quite closely with Carl Crowe as well, which I think some of Bunny's messaging will be stuff that Crowe's kind of reinforced through, his vast knowledge of spin bowling. And, again, not to talk up Bunny, but, his work ethic and the hours he's prepared to put into you is exceptional, and probably something I've not seen in a coach. So, I feel very lucky to be working with him.
Right. That is it for episode 10. Callum, thank you very much for joining us. Nick, thank you very much for joining us. Nobody covers county cricket like the cricketer. This is my favourite ad reader every week. Get it and nail it every time. And you can get access to our coverage of all 18 teams online from as little as £3.99 a month. Our own top team of county championships have won the outstanding online coverage of domestic cricket prize for 6 years running. That's the ECB's award. So, it's 100% true and correct. So you don't have to take our word for it. If you want to subscribe, the details are in the show notes. Callum, thank you very much. Nick, thank you very much.
By the way, subscriber.
Yeah. I'm a subscriber. Yeah.
A happy subscriber. Hey, one of.
I was waiting for the T20 reviews impatiently.
Let's go.
Right, perfect. Right, thank you for listening. And if you're on YouTube, we'll see you next week. And if you're on Spotify or wherever, we'll speak to you next week. See you then.